Dolly Parton isn't just the queen of country. She's a living monument to resilience, tenderness, and unshakable truth. She once gave us, "I will always love you." A farewell so raw and beautiful that it became one of the most powerful ballads of all time. But behind that voice, soaring, flawless, unforgettable, lies a woman who has endured heartbreak that no audience ever truly saw. For over 6 decades, she carried loss like a second skin, turning grief into melody and silence into songs that healed millions. She didn't just rise from poverty, she rose from ashes most couldn't even name. Now at 79, while most would choose to rest, Dolly Parton still faces storms, with a quiet strength and a fire that refuses to fade. Don't look away, because what she's still enduring might just reveal the most powerful chapter of all, and it may be the most devastating story she's ever lived. If her music has ever comforted you, leave a like below, for the woman who gave us her heart in every note, and still hasn't stopped giving. Some souls come into this world already bruised, carrying wounds so deep that even the innocence of childhood can't begin to heal them. Dolly Rebecca Parton was one of those souls. Born on January 19, 1946 in Sevier County, Tennessee, her first cradle was a one-room cabin in the Great Smoky Mountains, a home with no electricity, no running water, and no promises. Her parents were so poor they paid the doctor who delivered her with a sack of cornmeal. She would later recall that night was lit only by the breathless stillness of the mountains, her mother laboring on a narrow bed under a quilt worn thin by many winters, the cold mountain air pressing through the walls like an uninvited guest. Outside, the wind rattled the boards. Inside, hope was the only warmth they could afford. The Partons weren't just poor. They were the kind of poor that lingers in the bones. Winters in the Smokies could be merciless. Dolly remembered waking in the middle of the night when the cold cut through the cracks in the wall, sharp enough to make her gasp. She and her 11 siblings would huddle together under a single blanket, clinging to one another for warmth. Decades later, she would half smile when she told an interviewer, "It was the only warm thing we knew," her voice catching just enough to betray the sting still there. Summers meant bathing in the river. Winters meant pans of icy water that made her skin burn. The air always smelled faintly of damp wood, and at night the hum of insects and the faint scurry of mice were the lullabies she fell asleep to. Her father, Robert Lee Parton, could not read or write, but to Dolly, he was the wisest man she would ever know. He rose before sunrise and worked until his hands were raw, hauling gravel, tending tobacco, taking any job that might keep 13 plates from going empty. Her mother, Avie Lee, was only 35 when she had brought all 12 children into the world. She cooked, cleaned, sewed, and told stories long after her voice had grown hoarse, using tales as a shield against the cruel edges of reality. By the time Dolly was 6, she was already a second mother in that cabin, fetching water from the creek, rocking babies to sleep, stirring beans over the wood stove. She didn't have dolls or board games. Her toys were the chores and the quiet understanding that everyone had to do their part to survive. Then, in 1955, when Dolly was 9, the air in the Parton home grew heavy in a way she had never felt before. Her baby brother Larry lived for only 4 days. There was no headstone, no service. Just a small, unmarked patch of earth behind the house. No one explained it to her in full, but the silence was deafening. Her mother would sit for hours, staring at nothing, her hands still but her grief alive in the room. Her father worked even longer days, as if more labor could push away the ache. Dolly carried that loss quietly for the rest of her life, later admitting that certain songs she wrote were ways of talking to the brothers she barely got to know. School offered little refuge. One winter, her mother sewed her a coat from leftover fabric scraps, each piece stitched with love and the hope that her daughter would wear it proudly. But at school, the other children laughed and pointed. To them, it was nothing more than rags. Dolly walked past them with her chin lifted, blinking back tears she refused to let them see. Years later, she would turn that memory into Coat of Many Colors, released in 1971, transforming humiliation into pride and hardship into art. She told interviewers she still struggled to sing it after her mother passed in 2003, because every word was tied to both love and loss. Music became her refuge and her rebellion. By age 7, she was writing songs, long before she could spell them, as a way to turn hunger into melody and grief into something she could hold. She sang to drown out the winter winds, to fill the quiet left by her brother's grave, to keep her heart from breaking under the weight of so much responsibility. "I didn't write to be famous," she would say decades later. "I wrote to survive." Dolly Parton didn't just rise from poverty. She rose from ashes most couldn't even name. Every cruel winter, every whispered goodbye, every long walk to school in a coat of scraps became part of the voice that would carry her from those mountains to the world's biggest stages. And yet, even with the glitter and the spotlight, she never forgot the little girl who slept in the cold, wore her mother's love on her back, and sang just to make it through the night. No one could have guessed that the girl who once sang barefoot in the hollers of Tennessee, her voice echoing off the Great Smoky Mountains, would one day command the grandest stages in the world. By the time Dolly Parton was 10, her voice was already drawing strangers to stop and listen. That same year, 1956, she began traveling with her Uncle Bill Owens to tiny radio stations and makeshift studios, their suitcases packed with little more than sandwiches and songs. They slept on couches, in borrowed rooms, and sometimes in the backseat of a car parked on a quiet street. "It was exciting, hungry, and heartbreaking all at once," she would later say. "A childhood both rich in dreams and poor in everything else." When Dolly graduated from Sevier County High School in the spring of 1964, there was no celebration trip, no pause. The morning after, she boarded a Greyhound bus to Nashville with a cardboard suitcase, $20, and a promise to herself that she would not come back empty-handed. The city of dreams was nothing like home. Its neon lights could be warm or merciless, depending on how the day went. She quickly learned that talent alone wasn't enough. Doors shut fast, sometimes before she had finished introducing herself. Many nights ended in a rented room so small she could reach the sink from her bed, staring out at the rain-slicked streets and wondering if anyone in this town believed in her the way she believed in herself. Her first recording contract with Monument Records in 1965 was supposed to be the big break. Instead, it felt like a cage. The executives decided her voice wasn't right for country music and pushed her toward bubblegum pop. In the studio, under the glare of unfamiliar lights, Dolly sang songs she didn't believe in. "Happy, Happy Birthday Baby" and "What Do You Think About Lovin'?" Her voice perfect, her heart absent. She later admitted those sessions left her feeling like she was wearing someone else's skin. The singles flopped, and in the eyes of Nashville's gatekeepers, she was just another small-town girl who didn't fit the mold. But Dolly's fire was not the kind that went out quietly. By day, she played in tiny clubs for tips barely enough to cover her rent. By night, she wrote songs on worn notepads, sometimes by candlelight when the power was cut. She and Uncle Bill kept knocking on doors, sending demo tapes to anyone who might listen. The breakthrough came not from her own voice, but her pen. In 1966, their song, "Put It Off Until Tomorrow," became a hit for country singer Bill Phillips. Suddenly, industry people were asking the same question: who's Dolly Parton? The following year, 1967, she released her debut album, Hello, I'm Dolly. It wasn't just a title, it was an introduction and a challenge. Her lyrics didn't float on pop's surface. They dug deep, telling stories of loss, endurance, and quiet rebellion. These were not fantasies. They were the truth of a young woman who had known hunger, grief, and the long climb out of the shadows. Yet even with a hit album, the industry still saw her as someone's girl singer. a backup voice, a novelty. What they didn't realize was that behind the sequins was steel, and beneath the sweet smile was a songwriter who would not be told who she was. Dolly had lived too much, lost too much, and worked too hard to let anyone else write her story. And soon, she would do something that proved she wasn't just here to sing. She was here to change the sound of country music forever. In 1973, she wrote and recorded a goodbye so raw, so breathtaking, that it would travel through decades and across genres. I Will Always Love You. From that moment, nothing, and no one, could keep her in the shadows again. Dolly Parton's climb to the top of country music was not a smooth ascent. It was a battle waged in the shadows of bright stage lights. By 1970, she had carved a space for herself on the Porter Wagoner Show, her voice soaring into living rooms across America every week. But behind the smiles and harmonies, creative tensions simmered. I felt like I was standing in somebody else's shadow, she would later admit. Her songwriting was too raw, too independent for some, and her growing ambition clashed with the role others expected her to play. The breaking point came in 1974, when she made the painful decision to leave Wagoner's show. That goodbye was sealed not with anger, but with a song, I Will Always Love You. A farewell so tender it masked the quiet heartbreak of severing a partnership that had defined her early career. I cried all the way to the top of the charts, Dolly later said, the smile not quite hiding the sting. A year earlier, she had unleashed Jolene on the world, a stripped-down, hypnotic plea that sliced through the airwaves in late 1973 and refused to fade. It wasn't just a hit, it was a statement. The song's haunting simplicity, paired with Dolly's unshakable delivery, forced even skeptics to admit she was a storyteller of rare power. Yet, even with chart toppers in hand, the industry still underestimated her. She faced dismissive producers, skeptical label executives, and critics who tried to reduce her artistry to novelty. Many thought she would remain someone's duet partner, never a force in her own right. But Dolly's pen was as unyielding as her voice. Night after night, between tours and television tapings, she wrote, sometimes in hotel rooms, sometimes in the back of tour buses, turning rejection into anthems and pressure into poetry. Every song was a lifeline thrown into the stormy seas of the music business, each one a reminder that she would not be sidelined. The mid-1970s tested that resolve. Relentless touring schedules, the grind of radio promotion, and the weight of proving herself in a male-dominated industry pushed her to the edge. Long hours under stage lights were followed by longer hours in recording studios. Her voice pushed to its limits, her fingers aching from the guitar strings. Even at the height of her popularity, she fought to maintain control over her sound and image, refusing to conform to formulas that would have dulled her authenticity. Her persistence paid off. In 1977, Here You Come Again became her first major crossover hit, reaching #1 on the country chart and breaking into the top 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. Nashville purists accused her of abandoning country, but she defended herself. I wasn't leaving country, I was taking it with me. Then came 1980, and with it 9 to 5. Written in a single night on the set of her film debut alongside Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin, the song topped the country, pop, and adult contemporary charts simultaneously, a history-making triple. But behind that success was a punishing schedule. Filming by day, recording by night, promotional tours in between. The mid-1980s brought new challenges as the music industry shifted. Dolly resisted the pressure to chase fleeting trends, instead doubling down on songwriting. Hits like Tennessee Homesick Blues, 1984, and Why'd You Come In Here Looking Like That, 1989, proved she could adapt without losing her voice. If I tried to chase trends, I'd just get lost in the crowd, she told one interviewer, her eyes flashing with the same defiance that had carried her from the Smoky Mountains to the world stage. By the end of the 1980s, Dolly Parton had not just reached the pinnacle of her profession, She had reshaped it. Her voice had become one of America's cultural landmarks, her songwriting a living archive of love, loss, defiance, and hope. The road to that summit was paved with sleepless nights, creative standoffs, and moments when even she wondered if she could keep going. But she did, and in doing so, she transformed herself from a performer into a legend. Even in the most dazzling moments of her career, spotlights flooding the stage, standing ovations rolling like waves, there were nights when Dolly Parton's thoughts drifted far from the applause. Somewhere between the end of a show and the quiet hum of a tour bus, memories crept in, uninvited but impossible to push away. She would find herself back in Locust Ridge, 1955, in that cramped cabin where life and loss existed side by side. Her baby brother Larry had been there for only 4 days, but his absence filled the house like a shadow that never left. At 9 years old, Dolly didn't know how to speak about grief. No one did. In her family, sorrow was something you carried in silence, tucked away in the corners of your heart while you kept moving forward. Her mother's eyes told the story without words. Her father's longer work hours spoke louder than any eulogy. And Dolly, she listened. She learned that the deepest pain often comes without explanation, and that love is most precious when it's fragile. Years later, as her career soared, that early wound found its way into every farewell she sang. "I Will Always Love You" may have been written for a professional goodbye, but its tenderness was born in a place far older than the moment it was penned. When she performed it, there was always an echo of a lullaby she never got to sing, a promise to someone she barely knew yet never stopped carrying. In interviews, she would smile through the ache, admitting softly, "I think I've been singing to the people I've lost all my life." That loss, quiet, unspoken, buried under decades of resilience, wasn't just a childhood memory. It was part of the foundation of her artistry, the thread that gave her music its ache, its honesty, its ability to hold a stranger's heart for 3 minutes and make them feel understood. And so, long after the charts had crowned her, after the awards had lined the shelves, the truest measure of Dolly's success wasn't the fame she earned, but the way she turned that silent grief into something millions could hear. She had learned in that cabin that life could take away without warning, but she had also learned how to give back in a way that would last forever. If Dolly Parton's music has a heartbeat, that steady, unshakable rhythm belonged to her mother, Avie Lee. She wasn't just the woman who brought Dolly into the world. She was the wellspring of her values, the keeper of her stories, and the invisible thread running through every note Dolly ever sang. And in December 2003, when Avie Lee passed away at the age of 80, Dolly's world shifted in a way no stage, no audience, and no award could steady. She later said that it felt as though a light went out in her life. At that time, Dolly was still touring, still releasing music, still smiling for cameras, but something essential was missing. It was Avie Lee who had pieced together the famous coat of many colors from scraps of cloth, sewing into it not just fabric, but dignity, pride, and unconditional love. That coat had inspired one of Dolly's most cherished songs, a ballad that audiences embraced as a testament to resilience. But in the months after her mother's passing, Dolly couldn't bring herself to sing it. Every time the opening chords rang out, her throat would close. "I'd try, but I'd just lose it," she admitted quietly. It wasn't just a song. It was my mama's hands, my mama's voice, my mama's love. The grief wasn't loud or public. Dolly had grown up in a home where pain was carried with quiet strength, and she mourned in much the same way. Privately, deeply, in the spaces between concerts and interviews. Friends later recalled how she would sometimes sit backstage, holding the original coat in her lap, her fingers tracing its seams like a map back to her childhood. This was the woman who had raised 12 children in a one-room cabin in Sevier County, who taught Dolly to believe that poverty didn't have to define her worth, who encouraged her to sing when life felt unbearable. Losing her meant losing the foundation beneath her feet. Yet, even in the middle of that heartbreak, Dolly found ways to keep her mother close. She began speaking more openly about Avie Lee's influence, telling audiences that, "My mama is in every good thing I've ever done." She shared stories of the songs her mother sang while working, the gentle wisdom she offered in hard times, and the way her laugh could fill a room no matter how little they had. She said her mother's voice still came to her in dreams, and in those dreams, she was never just Avie Lee. She was home. Years later, when Dolly finally returned to Coat of Many Colors on stage, she sang it with a new kind of ache. The audience heard hope, perseverance, and beauty. Dolly heard her mother's voice, felt her mother's hands guiding the needle through the fabric, and remembered what it was like to wear something made entirely of love. For all the glitter and glory of her career, this was the truth Dolly carried. The greatest gift she ever had was a mother who taught her how to face a hard world with a soft heart. And that is a melody that will never fade. Among all of Dolly Parton's siblings, Floyd was more than just family. He was the rare soul who could finish her melodies before she even sang them. From their earliest days in Locust Ridge, Tennessee, they would sit on the porch with a battered guitar between them, scribbling lyrics on scraps of paper, trading lines until the words felt like they had been born together. They weren't just brother and sister. They were creative twins, bound by blood and music. Together, they wrote songs that carried pieces of their childhood into the world, the most famous being Rockin' Years, which soared to #1 in 1991. Floyd's name appeared quietly in the credits of countless tracks, his pen guiding the voice the world had come to love. But in December 2018, that harmony was broken. Floyd Parton died at the age of 61, and with him, a part of Dolly's own rhythm fell silent. This loss cut differently. It wasn't just personal. It was stitched into her music. Floyd understood the way her heart beat in 4/4 time. He could hear the truth in her pauses, the stories she didn't say out loud. And now, that presence was gone. Dolly did not turn her grief into a press tour. There were no televised tributes, no long public eulogies, only a brief family statement and a funeral away from cameras, where the Partons came together not as country music royalty, but as children burying one of their own. In the stillness of that service, they sang Rockin' Years one last time. No microphones, no stage, just trembling voices rising for Floyd alone. Those who were there said you could hear the ache in every note, the kind of singing that comes when your heart is breaking in real time. In the months after, those close to Dolly spoke of a silence that seemed to follow her everywhere. She kept working, recording, performing, but the air around her felt different, as if a piece of her foundation had been quietly removed. Floyd wasn't just another brother. He was a bridge back to the mountains, to the girl she once was before the lights, before the fame. And losing him was like losing a map she had carried all her life. For a woman who had always turned sorrow into song, this was a wound even lyrics struggled to hold. The chords they once strummed together now felt unfinished, the harmony missing its answer. And though Dolly still walks onto stages and greets the crowds with that trademark smile, somewhere in the shadows of her music lies a verse she will never sing again. Some heartbreaks are too raw for melody, too heavy for even the gentlest song to carry. They don't fade. They sit in the quiet spaces of the soul, where every memory sharpens into ache. For Dolly Parton, the loss of her niece Tever was one of those wounds. Too young, too sudden, too tragic to soften with rhyme. 36 is supposed to be an age of possibility, when mistakes can still be mended, when hope still has time to take root. But Tever's story ended in silence, far from the glitter of stages and the warmth of applause, leaving behind a hollow that no spotlight could reach. Those close to Dolly say this loss cut deeper than most, because she had watched the storm gather for years. Tever fought battles that stayed mostly hidden. Shadows that clung no matter how bright the day, fights over custody that chipped away at her spirit, and burdens that seemed too heavy for one heart to hold. Dolly wasn't a distant observer. She stepped straight into the tempest, trying with all she had to pull her niece back into the light. She paid $25,000 from her own pocket for rehab. Not for headlines, not for image, but as an act of pure, desperate love. She hoped it would be the moment the tide turned, the day the song found a new verse. But the tide did not turn. And that is the kind of grief that never loosens its grip. There was no breaking news, no public vigil, only a quiet farewell, a small family gathered in mourning, and a woman left asking herself how, with all her reach, her resources, her heart, she could still lose the one she fought so fiercely to save. Tever's obituary was short. Her life ended shorter still. But the emptiness she left behind lingers like a note that will not resolve. For Dolly, it became an unshakable truth. Fame cannot rewrite every ending. Money cannot lift every weight. And even love, boundless and unconditional, cannot always keep the song from ending too soon. 36 years old. And sometimes, the hardest part of living is knowing the music stopped before it ever had the chance to soar. Some dreams never leave you, even when life makes them impossible. For Dolly Parton, that dream was motherhood, a melody she could hum but never sing out loud. When she married Carl Dean in 1966, she pictured a home filled with the soft chaos of family life. Tiny shoes lined up by the door, bedtime stories told under warm quilts, little hands reaching for hers. She imagined lullabies echoing through the rooms, not to an audience of thousands, but to a single child who would know her only as Mama. That vision stayed with her for years, even as her name lit up marquees across the country. Then, in 1982, everything changed. A private health crisis brought on by endometriosis led to surgery that would take away the possibility of having children. She left the hospital not just healing from the procedure, but carrying the crushing knowledge that the life she had dreamed of, the one with bedtime kisses and first days of school, was gone forever. The loss was not loud. There were no headlines, no public tributes. It was a silence that followed her everywhere. She once admitted that in the weeks after, she would lie in bed and think, "I wish I had the nerve to just end it all." For a woman who could light up any room with her smile, the nights felt darker than she'd ever known. It wasn't just about the absence of children. It was about the absence of the future she'd been building in her heart since she was young. No chubby arms flung around her neck, no giggles spilling down hallways, no tiny voice calling for her in the middle of the night. Instead, there was the stillness of a dream that would never come true. She poured that unspent love into her siblings' children, and later, into millions of little ones through her imagination library. She gave away books, encouragement, and hope to children she would never meet, telling herself that maybe God had other plans, that maybe she was meant to mother the world. And yet, there were moments, quiet and unguarded, when the ache returned. Passing a store window filled with baby clothes, hearing a child call out to their mother in a crowd, watching parents in her audience sway with their babies to her songs. These moments pressed against the tender place in her heart, where the dream of her own child still lived. She spoke of it rarely and always with grace, but those who knew her understood the depth of the loss. Love that big does not vanish. It lingers, reshaping itself, finding new places to grow. And though she has filled countless lives with joy, the whisper of that unfulfilled dream has never left her. Some songs, she's learned, will never be sung. They stay inside, where only the heart can hear them. A lullaby for a child who will never be born, but will always be loved. But the loss of the children she would never have was only part of the storm. Behind that heartbreak, her body was waging its own silent war, one that would test her more than any audience or stage ever could. At the height of her fame in the 1980s, Dolly Parton looked untouchable. The rhinestones blazed under stage lights, the chart toppers kept coming, the movie roles multiplied. To the world, she was a storm of energy and joy. A woman who could light up an arena with a single laugh. But when the curtain fell and the doors closed, the truth was far quieter and far darker. Her body was breaking down, and her mind was following. The years of relentless touring, the constant eyes of the public, and a private emotional storm were eroding her from the inside out. What began as exhaustion soon revealed itself as something more insidious. A deep, unyielding pain settled in her body, later diagnosed as endometriosis, a condition that brought with it not just physical agony, but the slow dread of knowing it would not simply go away. Some nights, she gripped the microphone so hard her knuckles went white, forcing a smile while each note sent a ripple of pain through her core. Every interview, every handshake, every glittering appearance became a performance layered on top of another performance, the one where she hid how much she hurt. But the battle was not only in her body. Alongside the physical pain was what she once called an affair of the heart. Not scandal, but a tangled private bond that left her drained and conflicted. Add to that family tensions and the crushing demands of fame, and even Dolly, the woman who had fought her way out of the Smoky Mountains, began to feel the weight was more than she could carry. In 1982, after a health crisis that ended in surgery, she awoke to a truth that struck harder than any critic's words. Her dream of motherhood might be gone forever. She smiled for the cameras, but inside she was mourning the life she had imagined. The bedtime stories, the tiny shoes by the door, the voice that would have called her Mama. It was grief without a grave, and it hollowed her. The illness became a spiral. She canceled shows, set down her guitar, and stopped writing. The woman who had always outrun the darkness now found herself lying in bed for days. Not because she wanted to, but because the air outside felt too heavy to breathe. She later said it wasn't sadness, but numbness. A flat, gray space where joy used to live. Friends began to worry. They saw the weight melt from her frame, the light dim in her eyes, the way her laughter no longer reached her voice. Then came the moment she almost didn't come back from. Alone in her home one afternoon, the dangerous quiet began to close in. Her thoughts drifted toward escape, the kind you can't take back. And then she heard it, the soft, deliberate padding of paws. Popeye, her little dog, had found her. He looked up at her with eyes that asked for nothing but her presence. That tiny heartbeat in the room snapped her back. She crumpled into sobs, the kind that come when you've been holding yourself together too long and realized in that moment that he had saved her life. The road back wasn't sudden or easy. She sought treatment, leaned into her faith, and returned to writing. Not to chase a hit, but to stitch herself back together. The songs that came carried a weight and clarity she had never known before, born from the shadows she had walked through. Looking back, she calls that season one of the most humbling of her life. It stripped away the glitter and left her with something harder, but more precious. The understanding that even legends can shatter and that survival itself can be the bravest thing you ever do. For decades, Carl Dean was the one person Dolly Parton could count on to love her. Not as a legend, not as a brand, but as a woman. To the rest of the world, she was an icon wrapped in rhinestones, but to him, she was simply Dolly. The woman in the faded housecoat, the laugh that came before the punchline, the quiet hand he reached for in the middle of the night. He was her anchor in a storm of fame, her home in a life lived on the road. And then, in 2025, at 82 years old, he was gone. He slipped away quietly in their Nashville home, the same house where they had shared coffee at dawn, and whispered prayers before bed. There were no flashing lights, no news crews, just the stillness of a room that had lost its heartbeat. That silence was a violence of its own, so sharp it seemed to press against her chest with every breath. Friends would later say that Dolly didn't just lose her husband. She lost the only version of herself that existed before the world claimed her. In the days that followed, she retreated. Curtains stayed drawn. Phones went unanswered. Meals went cold on untouched plates. For someone who had built her life on bringing joy to others, she now found herself unable to lift the corners of her mouth. Even the music, the thing that had carried her through every loss before, failed her. She would pick up her guitar, strum a single chord, and feel it dissolve into the air like smoke. When it came time to say goodbye, Dolly refused to let the world in. She planned the funeral herself, not as a public event, but as an act of love. The small chapel on their property, where Carl once sat in quiet prayer, was transformed into a room of memories. Wildflowers, the same kind he used to gather from their land and leave in a jar on the kitchen table, lined the altar. Faded photographs from their 58 years together told a story no magazine had ever printed: the dirt-streaked smiles after planting a garden, the Christmas mornings in flannel pajamas, the way his arm fit perfectly around her shoulder when they walked down their driveway. When she finally stood to speak, Dolly didn't address the mourners. Her eyes stayed fixed on his casket, as if willing him to sit up and grin at her the way he always did when she came into a room. Her voice wavered, not from performance nerves, but from the strain of holding back a tidal wave. She thanked him, not for the grand gestures, but for the small mercies, loving her without condition, protecting her from a world that didn't always care who she really was, and keeping her secrets safe. Then she unfolded a piece of paper. It was a letter Carl had written her years before, meant to be found after he was gone. Her hands trembled as she read aloud. "You were always my shining star, but I never needed the world to know. Just you." By the last line, her voice had broken completely. And then, as if compelled by something deeper than choice, she reached for her guitar. The room went still. She began to play a song no one had ever heard, a love song written decades earlier for Carl alone. It was fragile, almost breaking apart under the weight of her grief. By the final verse, tears streamed down her face, her voice cracking, and every person in that chapel wept with her. When the last chord faded, she set the guitar down and stepped away, not toward the crowd, but into the silence that waited for her at home. The days after were lonelier than she could have imagined. She found herself setting 2 plates at breakfast before remembering there was only one to fill. She still turned to tell him something, only to face an empty chair. Even the air in the house seemed heavier without his laugh to lift it. Carl's death wasn't just the loss of a husband. It was the erasure of the only place she had ever belonged without having to earn it. Now, the woman who had given the world so many songs of love and hope was left with a silence so deep it echoed in every room, every breath. Every night she lay awake waiting for a voice that would never call her name again. At 79, Dolly Parton stands on the shimmering peak of a life that would seem complete to anyone else. Wealth counted in hundreds of millions, her name carved into the granite of music history, her voice woven into the memories of generations. And yet, inside the wide, echoing halls of her Brentwood, Tennessee estate, the home she shared with Carl Dean for nearly 60 years, the loudest sound is the one she cannot bear, the sound of nothing. The mansion still wears its beauty proudly. Rolling lawns that drink in the sun, gardens that bloom in defiance of the seasons, and red-roofed guest houses perched above the hills. But every corner holds an absence. The porch where she and Carl once talked until dawn now holds one rocking chair in motion and one that stays perfectly still. His photographs still watch over the hallway. His boots remain by the door, polished but never moved. The armchair where he read the paper each morning sits in its place, as if waiting for him to sink into it once more. Staff pass quietly through. Family drops in. Old friends from the music world bring warmth for an afternoon. But when the last car leaves the drive, the quiet closes in again. She rises before the sun, not because she must, but because she cannot sleep past the hour when they used to share coffee. In the same worn kitchen, she brews her cup, sets it on the table across from an empty space, and eats her breakfast in the kind of silence that feels heavy in the chest. Her morning walks always lead her toward Carl's chapel, a small cedar sanctuary where the air is thick with the scent of wood and prayer. There, she hums songs no one else will ever hear, verses meant only for him, drifting into the stillness like smoke. She has no children, but her love has spilled into the lives of many. Her goddaughter Miley Cyrus, her nieces and nephews, and millions of children around the world through her imagination library. She still works, still writes, still tends to Dollywood, which draws over 3 million visitors each year. Her catalog of more than 3,000 songs continues to bring in millions annually. Her collection of vintage cars and awards shines under perfect light. Her jewels could fill vaults. And yet, none of it glows like the warmth of Carl's smile did. Her health holds steady, kept by careful discipline, measured meals, daily walks, and a devotion to her trademark glamour. But in certain moments, under the lights, you can see it. The shadow in her eyes, the weariness that even rhinestones cannot hide. She appears in public less often now, choosing carefully where her presence still feels worth giving. Those close to her whisper that she has been making quiet preparations, ensuring her legacy will live on in both her music and her giving. The days follow their own slow rhythm. Writing in her private studio, calls with her team, bursts of laughter with visiting family. But every evening ends the same way. On the porch swing, watching the Tennessee sun slide into night. The chains creak, the wind moves through the trees, and she speaks softly into the air as if it might carry her words to him. In those moments, the world's unstoppable woman is simply a wife still in love, living with a longing so deep, no stage, no song, no fortune could ever fill it. Dolly Parton has never been only a singer, and she has never been only a celebrity. Across nearly 7 decades, she became something far rarer, a living monument to compassion, a national treasure whose worth cannot be tallied in platinum records, sold-out arenas, or box office success. Her truest legacy was never built solely in the glow of spotlights or the echo of applause. It was built quietly, brick by brick, in the hearts of those she touched. She rose from the dust and pine of a one-room cabin in rural Tennessee, carrying with her not just a voice but a vision. That kindness could be as powerful as ambition. She became a symbol of generosity, resilience, and a kind of wisdom that comes only from surviving storms. She never forgot the ridges and hollows that shaped her. And she made sure the world never forgot them either. Her philanthropy has lifted strangers into stability. Her songs have bound up wounds invisible to the eye. And her words, plain-spoken, unvarnished, true, have been passed down like heirlooms between generations. Even now, in the soft light of her later years, her influence doesn't fade. It deepens. Through Dollywood, she sustains her hometown with jobs, tourism, and pride. Through the Imagination Library, she has placed more than 200 million books into the hands of children worldwide, many of whom might never have owned one otherwise. Through her music, she has given a voice to joy and grief, to the hard truth of loss and the fierce triumph of hope. And yet Dolly understands what so few ever do. No spotlight, no matter how bright, burns forever. In the quiet hours, she has begun to shape the chapter that will be written after she is gone. Those close to her say she has made every arrangement, wills, trusts, and final wishes, crafted with the same care and precision she once gave to a melody. Without biological children, she has turned her love toward godchildren, nieces, nephews, and the countless lives she has guided with her open hands. She has often said her greatest wish is not to be remembered for her stardom, but for her heart. Her estate, estimated at more than $650 million, will be a living extension of her values, supporting literacy, healthcare, music education, and the preservation of the Appalachian heritage that raised her. The true heirs to her life's work will be the dreamers who start as she once did, barefoot, overlooked, but carrying a fire inside them. Dolly's fortune was never just about money. It was about standing tall without crushing others, giving more than you take, loving harder than life often allows. Someday, years from now, her voice will live only in the grooves of records and the glow of reruns. But her name will still ripple outward, not just in music, but in every library corner where a child turns a page, in every song sung by someone who finally believed they were worthy, in every quiet act of kindness done by someone she once inspired. That will be Dolly Parton's true legacy. That will be her last unending song. In the end, the story of Dolly Parton is not simply one of wealth, fame, or even resilience. It is a lifelong love letter. A love letter to the music that first rose from the hollows of Tennessee and carried her across the world. A love letter to the mountains that cradled her childhood and taught her the strength of roots. A love letter to the people, family, friends, strangers, who believed in her even when the odds said she should have faded. And perhaps most of all, a love letter to the man who walked beside her for nearly 60 years, who loved her not for the rhinestones or the spotlight, but for the woman she was when no one was watching. She has given the world pieces of herself in song, in story, in generosity that has quietly changed millions of lives. She has known the ecstasy of standing before a roaring crowd and the heartbreak of standing alone in a quiet house. Her journey has been stitched together with threads of triumph and threads of grief, with moments so bright they could blind you and nights so dark they seemed endless. One day, when the final curtain falls, she will leave behind far more than a fortune. She will leave behind a legacy woven from grace and grit, from loss and love, from the unshakable belief that where you come from is never something to escape. It is something to honor. Yet even now, as she walks through the silence of her Tennessee estate, there lingers a question that hums like an unanswered chord. When she is gone, who will carry that legacy forward? Who will keep her mountains alive in song, her values alive in action, her love alive in the hearts of those who never met her but felt her just the same? And now, we want to hear from you. If her story has touched your heart, what part stays with you the most? Share your thoughts, your memories, or even your favorite song in the comments, so that together, we can help carry forward the spirit she has spent a lifetime building. Because the true measure of a life like hers is not only in the applause it gathers, but in the echoes it leaves behind, long after the music fades.